This week has been nuts, right? I mean, this week started with the President of the United States lavishing praise for hours on the dictator of North Korea after driving a hard bargain in which the North Koreans got a summit with the U.S. president, hours of praise for their dictator from him, a cessation of U.S. and South Korean joint military exercises, the apparent promise from the president that economic sanctions could be dropped soon, too. And they got all of those things in exchange for them doing nothing. That's how the week started. By the end of the week today, the Associated Press published news that the pace at which the Trump administration is ordering that children be torn away from their parents at the Mexican border, the pace of that new policy of the Trump administration is now running at nearly 50 kids a day. 50 times a day, an intact family is being forcibly separated by the U.S. government, and the children are being taken away and locked up separately from their parents. Nearly 50 times a day. And also today, the president's campaign chairman indicted and arraigned on new felony charges that he engaged in obstruction of justice and a criminal conspiracy with a Russian citizen who's assessed by the FBI to have active ties to a Russian intelligence service. The president's campaign chairman today sent to jail, potentially for months, to await one of his 2 federal felony trials. Paul Manafort's Russian co-defendant has not entered a plea on these most recent felony charges that they both faced together, nor was he jailed alongside Paul Manafort today. That's because he's in Russia, where the Russian government will presumably continue to shield him from the special counsel's investigation and, like the other 13 Russian citizens who have been charged thus far with felonies in the Mueller investigation, the Russian government presumably will continue to prevent him from being extradited to a U.S. courtroom to face these charges alongside Manafort. So it's tempting to say this is a wild week in the news. It is certainly a wild time to be a living, sentient American citizen. But in some ways, it feels like the news right now is maybe more of a piece. At least a lot of it is. Susan Glasser at The New Yorker reports today that the president has now told his staff to start planning for what he wants to be his next summit, which he wants to be with Vladimir Putin. The president's unilateral concessions to the North Korean dictator earlier this week included a surprise gift that China and Russia both have been asking for months, and that we now know Putin personally lobbied Trump about months ago. When Trump announced in Singapore this week that he was going to halt joint U.S.-South Korean military exercises, that was reportedly a surprise to everybody else in the White House and to the U.S. military. The president just called an audible on that and announced it on his own. But we now know that Russia had been asking for it, that President Vladimir Putin had personally asked President Trump for that. President Trump this week granted that wish. This is a president who benefited from Russian interference in the election to try to help him win, a president who continued even today to rail against the investigation of that interference, a president who continues to help Russia out, even in ways that surprise the rest of the people who now work for him. And the jailing of his campaign chairman today is widely being described as having nothing to do with any of that. And in a literal letter of the law sense, that is maybe true. The Trump campaign chair is now jailed while awaiting trial on charges of money laundering, bank fraud, tax fraud, conspiracy to defraud the United States, false statements, obstruction of justice, conspiracy, et cetera, et cetera. Here's the thing. Paul Manafort going to jail is the most dramatic sign yet that Mr. Manafort is not planning on cooperating with prosecutors, no matter what they throw at him, no matter what they charge him with, no matter how hard they're going to make his life. And his life just got very, very, very much harder today. Being in jail tonight is no joke. But what is it that they want him to cooperate with them about? Paul Manafort was charged in a joint indictment alongside a longtime business associate who is believed to work for Russian intelligence and who is currently a fugitive from U.S. justice being shielded from U.S. courts by the Russian government. Paul Manafort is known to have been in frequent, if not constant, communication with that alleged Russian intelligence operative throughout the time he was running the Donald Trump for President campaign. That Russian intelligence operative is the person through whom Paul Manafort reached out during the campaign to a Russian oligarch close to Vladimir Putin to offer that oligarch private briefings on the U.S. election while he was in charge of the Trump campaign. That same Russian oligarch alleges in multiple court filings that Paul Manafort owes him millions of dollars. The Associated Press reported last year that that same Russian oligarch signed Paul Manafort up to a $10 million a year contract to promote the interests of the Putin government. Paul Manafort's time running the Trump campaign came to an end when there started to be too many press reports about surreptitious payments he'd allegedly been receiving from pro-Putin political parties in Ukraine, in the former Soviet Union. Before he left the campaign, though, the time he spent running the Trump campaign coincided with the sharp rise in Russian government and intelligence activity to benefit Trump's campaign and help Trump win. And that's not even mentioning that CNN report last year that U.S. intelligence agencies collected intercepted communications among suspected Russian operatives where they were discussing amongst themselves their communications with Paul Manafort and how Paul Manafort had been encouraging whatever help he could get for the Trump campaign from Russia. So no, the Trump campaign chairman going to jail today technically has nothing to do with Russia, or the Trump campaign allegedly working with Russia on a foreign intelligence operation to swing our last election. That is not why Paul Manafort was jailed today. But that is, presumably, what prosecutors would like to talk to him about, if only he would talk to them. Why won't he? Is it because if he does talk, he's scared of who will come knocking on his door, and he's more scared of that than jail? Is it because he really thinks he's going to win his case? He's going to be acquitted on all charges. Is that possible? Hold on, more ahead.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.